Hello, everyone. Welcome to another awesome episode of The Rundown. I'm Sunny Galt. I'm a messenger with United Network News. We are the news division of United Network. We are also part of CARE, the Center for Amity and Restoration of Earth. And our mission is to bring you the real news. What's really happening on our planet? What's happening in our states, our territories, our countries? What's happening in our own backyard? Because we live in a day and age where seeing isn't really believing, at least it shouldn't be, especially if you're watching it through some sort of computer or television, because we have AI going on and all these other crazy things. So just because you see it doesn't really mean it's happening. And there's a lot of influence going on out there, right? Both through mainstream media as well as alternative media. And what I like to think that we do, what I aim to do, and my intention is to cut through the noise for you guys, okay? Because we're not going to talk about stuff that doesn't matter. We're going to talk about things that are about changing our planet, that are about improving our lives, that are about love and connecting with other people, and just living in a completely different reality than we're used to. And I don't know about you, but that sounds really good to me. And we're going to dive into all of that coming up in the GIA report. So if you want more information about what United Network News is, who we are, and what we do, I encourage you guys to visit our website, unitednetwork.earth. What you're listening to right now, this podcast, it's a week in review. So we put out a lot of content throughout the week. And I know some of you guys listen to this podcast as a review, which is great. Some of you guys may have skipped something. You know, you guys have busy weeks, you have families, you have jobs, you have other things going on in your life. So I hope that this podcast is a good way to catch up on some of the stories you may have missed this week. And it's also a great way to share UNN with other people, because UNN, we do not get our money through any kind of advertising. You know, we don't work with third-party companies and get kickbacks and, you know, money for advertising, more like a traditional media group would. So we get our money through you guys, our subscribers, our members. You know, we also have some of our own products, which you can check out on our website if you'd like to, that we produce in-house or that we source from the best ingredients. You know, we've got essential oils. I'm a big essential oil fan. If you guys like the purest form of essential oils without all the crazy chemicals and subscription fees that you get with other companies, you know, there's some things like that we do. But really, it's about you guys. It's about you guys supporting us through your memberships. And so, again, there's more information on our website about that. If you guys would like to join, that'd be awesome. That does give you instant access to all of our content. We do release our videos about a week after they're available exclusively to our members. We put them out on YouTube and Rumble. The links to all of our social media, if you want to follow us, are also on our website. With any information we put out there, we encourage you guys to think critically about the information you're given, to continually ask questions, to do your own research, to rely on your own discernment. I know I talk a lot about that, but that's because, like I said earlier, you can't believe what you see anymore. So you have to go with what you feel, because truth is a frequency. Lies are a completely different frequency, right? And you have to be able to tune into that to know what's really happening. And then when you figure stuff out, we encourage you to share it with other people, because that's how we're all going to grow and learn. And we're all on different journeys. We all have different experiences, and not just this life, but other lives we may have lived. And we're all here for a purpose right now. So I believe if you're listening to this podcast, it's because you are part of the solution. Either that or you're deep state trying to figure out what we're doing, and good luck, because we're not going to tell you anything that we don't want you guys to know. And quite frankly, after listening to the GIA report this week, I don't think most of you are smart enough to figure it out on your own. Again, I'm talking to the crazy deep state people. The rest of you lovely Homo sapiens, let's get going with this week's episode. Here's the rundown of stories you may have missed this week on UNN. So let's brag for a little bit about our awesome field messengers, because this really is what United Network News is all about. As I said earlier, you get all these narratives thrown at you throughout the day, and you're trying to figure out what's real, what's not real, but they're all being told to you through, these people that are on TV. Maybe they've got a podcast, maybe, I don't know, they show up in your social media feed or something like that. And it's really hard to know what's real. And we think the best way to break down these stereotypes that have been fed to us, these crazy narratives, they're like throwing everything at us right now, trying to see what will stick, every day. Like there's something else out there that's going to kill us. Either it's another country, it's a virus, it's this, it's that. Nothing is sticking because they're all lies. So if you want to be part of that solution in breaking down all the noise and just reconnecting, we're reconnecting, guys, with your fellow Homo sapiens. And I say that if you're new to UNN, I'm saying Homo sapiens because humans are something completely different. But if you are a natural, authentic person with a organic soul that comes from the creator of the universe, God, source, whatever term you use, then you are actually a Homo sapien. You are not a human. So if you want to be part of the solution, we encourage you guys to become a field messenger. And you don't have to have some crazy experience. You don't have to have a background in news or anything like that. Quite the opposite. In fact, that's not even what we're looking for at all. That's part of the old system. We want you guys to grab your phones, because they all have these incredible videos and audio systems built into them, and tell us what's going on in your community. That could be some really awesome thing your community is doing. That could be, something that needs to be improved. That could be, crazy weather that you're experiencing. Whatever it is, share with us what's going on. Record some video, tell us your story. You don't even have to be on camera, and send it to us. We actually have a field messenger app. All those links and stuff are, again, on our website. So we make it really easy to upload all of your content. And then we've got an awesome team of producers and editors that work on your content, and we put it into a story, and then it goes up on our news or goes out through the app in some way. And so we want you guys to join us in being part of this solution. And today I've got several stories to share with you from other incredible field messengers all over the world. The first one comes from Akira in Japan. And he does a story about being able to see pandas for the first time. And this was at a local zoo for him. And, we think about pandas, obviously being from China. That's where they originated. And I know here in the U.S., I live in San Diego, and we've got this incredible zoo. You guys have probably heard of it, San Diego Zoo. And I'm actually kind of used to seeing pandas because of that. But not everyone has seen pandas, and it can be a very fun event if you haven't seen them before. And so this was Akira's whole experience of seeing pandas for the first time. And it was really cool. He got it all on camera. And at first, they let you into this room. I think he said he waited in line for over an hour. And then they let small groups of people in for like a minute or something like that. And at first, this panda was not even facing him. And he was all upset because he was like, oh no, this is my moment. And he couldn't see the panda. And then it sounded like, his prayers were answered, because the panda turned around and sat right down in front of them. And I think it was eating some bamboo, something like that. And so, I actually ended up doing a little bit of research on pandas after watching this story, because it got me thinking about why, obviously pandas, again, originally from China. But why does China have this hold on pandas? And I actually found out that before 1984, they, meaning China, used to gift pandas to other countries. And then after 1984, they started to loan them. which is really interesting, right? As part of trades or political agreements, there would be a loan for pandas, right? And they charge a lot of money for these loans, usually upward of $1 million a year, okay? And get this, if the pandas happen to procreate, then those babies also belong to China. So when the lease is up, the babies go with. I think there's another field messenger report in there for somebody because sooner or later we will learn that animals aren't property, and this may not be the best way to do business. But I think there's more to that story. So anyone wants to pursue that, I think it's going to be an interesting one. All right, Emma out of Spain talks about the goats that are on Fuerteventura, where she is located. She's located on an island, which is right off the main part of Spain. And goats are key parts of their culture, their environment. They roam freely. They are a symbol of the region. And they even shape local life. And what was really cool is Emma happened to be going through this area where there were goats, and she saw a mama goat give birth to two, I think they're called kids, aren't they? Baby goats, they're called kids. So she had a couple of kids right in front of Emma. And don't worry, we kept it very appropriate, as far as what we showed. But just the miracle of life, right? And she just happened to be, right there, right place at the right time. One of the goats was black. The other one was primarily white with a little bit of black. And she said there's 30 different species of goats on the island. So that was a pretty cool story. Thank you, Emma, for sharing that with us. Melissa out of Kentucky, which is a state in the U.S., talks about some crazy electromagnetic frequencies going on in her area. She said there was a sudden, significant spike in EMF readings. And she's in, if you guys are curious, Franklin, Kentucky, although I'm sure if we all got out our EMF readers, we would be experiencing this as well. And she believes it was connected, at least in her area, to the heavy chemtrail activity, right? So the streaks that you see in the sky, that don't go away, like contrails, if it was just steam and stuff, it would just go away. When it stays up there, that means those are chemicals that fall down and impact us in a lot of different ways. And it can interact and intensify EMF frequencies. And this can cause all sorts of problems like nausea and body aches. She was checking these. She had an app on her phone, and they were just through the roof, just crazy. So again, not to scare, okay, but we do need to be aware of what's going on because we don't want to buy into these programs anymore, and we can speak out against that. I don't mean, going out with our pitchforks and stuff. I'm literally saying we can change reality, but we have to be aware of what's really happening before we do that, right? All right, Amy out of New Jersey takes us to the Catskill Kaleidoscope. It is a world record-holding attraction in New York, the state of New York. It is built inside a repurposed 60-foot grain silo. And she's calling it an art installation. It really is. We got to see how beautiful it is. It cost $250,000 to build. And they did this because they knew it was going to be a tourist attraction. It would also create new jobs in the area. Pretty cool that it was built inside an old grain silo, right? So they repurposed that. And it's from the perspective of like looking through the kaleidoscope. So you see a lot of really cool things. There's even some music that's set to it, all these beautiful images. And she said 24 guests can fit in this room at one time, although there were far fewer people there when she went, and they estimate about 25,000 people visit the kaleidoscope every year. Very interesting. Did not know that existed. Sophia out of Trinidad and Tobago, I believe she was actually in Trinidad for this. She went and visited the Livet, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, Wellness Center, and she interviewed Dr. Hackett, a lovely man who you can just really tell the energy about him. He is for humanity, or Homo sapiens, as we like to say. He's about light and love and helping people find their purpose. But he focuses on heart rate variability. And you can look that up. You can kind of learn a little bit more about that. But he says that he calls it HRV, heart rate variability. And it tests the space in between the heartbeats, right? So not when it goes up, but it's the space in between, which he says is a biomarker for longevity and mortality. He says it's 90% more accurate than a polygraph, which we know polygraphs aren't necessarily that accurate. There's a lot of people that can beat them. But I've never heard this before. I really wanted to hear him talk more. So if you want to learn a little bit more about that, be sure to check out Sophia's report. Helen, who reports with Nature. I love it when she says that in her reports. She is coming to us from Australia, and she takes us to the Northern Territory, where the Burunga Festival celebrates Indigenous culture. Of course, they had amazing music and dancing, tribal dancing as well. So people were just dancing to the music, but then also they had these beautiful dances from Indigenous people. And she also went in this hot spring, which she says you may not want to do this hot spring area certain times of the year, but she was in it in Australia. It's summertime, right? And so now it is crocodile free. So that's the best time to go into any kind of water. And I would agree with her, bypass the crocodiles, only go during the summertime. But it looked like everyone was having a really good time there. All right, Lawrence, who is out of New Mexico, that's a state in the U.S., he takes us to the Good Medicine Confluence. And it is a gathering that revives natural traditions. It offers wisdom and practices to nurture a thriving, balanced, and healthy life for everyone. So basically, people come together, and it's really about remembering and sharing older traditions, medicinal, what we would think about as things being very natural and earth-based solutions for medical issues, and just sharing that information. He says it took place over 4 days at Ghost Ranch, more than 100 classes, which in the video that I saw, he must have been taking video in the individual classes. It didn't seem like there were a ton of people. But hey, if you had 100 classes over 4 days, it just looked like a beautiful retreat. Everyone there seemed really lovely and really intent on bringing back some of those healings, right? Ways to live and to thrive and to have a more fulfilled life. All right, Emma again. Emma, who had the goats that gave birth, she's back again. And this time she is sharing her favorite remedies for managing cold symptoms. So I think she had some guests in the area, or maybe she was talking about Fuerteventura in general. They have a lot of tourism there. And, when people come and they visit, sometimes they leave some bacteria behind. And before you know it, you're coughing, you're having some issues. So she shared some of her natural solutions, including a pine needle-based cough syrup and lozenges. That's a tough word to say. And a travel nebulizer. Now, that's not a gadget from Star Trek, although maybe it is. I feel like I've heard the word nebulizer in regards to various sci-fi movies. But this is, you can look it up online. It looked really cool though, but it has a mask and an area for solution. It just helps you breathe in whatever special solution you create, of course, all natural things. And it helps to clear your mucus, which I really could have used a few weeks ago. I don't know if you could tell. I was losing my voice and everything. And then, did you hear that? It just happened. I'm telling you, the Matrix. Oh, goodness. Got to clear that out, right? Got to get me one of those travel nebulizers. And our final field messenger report is out of Uganda. Nkata Hamza shows us the daily struggle to collect water for his orphanage. And he and these kids from his orphanage make this trek. He says it's a 1-hour walk to get to the only real source of water for their area. He admits the water there is contaminated, but they can go sometimes upwards of 5 times per day. They make this trek, and he was showing us what they had to do. Now, that in itself is very sad. Obviously, that's part of restoration. We've got to fix things like that. The upside of this report is seeing all the beautiful faces of those children. And despite having to make that trek, sometimes 5 times a day, these were just the most joyous, beautiful children. I mean, you really just got to see it. It's like, it just seemed like they had no cares in the world, that life was beautiful. And we know that it really is all about perspective. And someone could look at this and be like, oh my gosh, 5 times a day. And we complain about stuff and water comes out of our faucet. Not the best water, at least not where I live. But, and then you hear stories like this and it's like, oh my gosh, right? It's a good reminder to not sweat the small stuff. Moving on to some of the stories that the news team and I worked on for you guys this week. So we're going to kick things off in England. We are talking about abuse for the national health system over there, for their healthcare workers. And it's happening throughout the UK. So I guess it's not just England, but it's rising sharply. And staff are facing everything from verbal threats to physical and even sexual assaults. Nursing leaders say the scale of violence has become a national emergency, and this is driven by mounting pressures like long wait times, we've reported on that, staff shortages, a mental health crisis that's happening, and eroding public patience since the pandemic.
Violent and abusive behavior against emergency medical staff often starts in the ambulance and ends up in the emergency department. That's where Jane spent the last 15 years as a nurse, saving lives in southwest England. We spoke on condition of anonymity. She tells me the pressure on services, long waits and corridor care are a contributing factor to a rise in angry attacks by patients that A&E staff are just trying to help.
My team and many nurses across the country have been victims of physical aggression, having things thrown at them. I've had a nurse, unfortunately, be pinned up against a wall.
Workers are calling for stronger leadership support, tougher legal consequences, better staffing, and public awareness campaigns. While the NHS has introduced zero-tolerance policies, de-escalation training, and closer police collaboration, unions warn enforcement remains uneven and too many attacks still go unpunished. Disinfectants have become a daily fixture in our homes, our schools, hospitals, especially since that pandemic, right, that they scared us with. But their constant use may come with hidden costs. Many products contain quaternary ammonium compounds, also known as quats, which can pose health concerns with long-term exposure. They can persist in the environment and disrupt water and soil ecosystems.
Long-term exposure to quats has been linked to asthma, hormonal disruption, and in animal studies, even reduced fertility. One study published in Reproductive Toxicology found that mice exposed to quats had significantly impaired reproductive function, even at low doses. And the CDC now actually recommends soap and water as your first line of defense.
Experts also warn overuse or improper dosing can help microbes adapt, so do the exact opposite, potentially fueling cross-resistance that makes bacteria harder to kill with both disinfectants and antibiotics. The message isn't, though, to stop disinfecting, but to use these chemicals more carefully, only when necessary, and with greater awareness of their long-term environmental and public health impact. China's education system is famously competitive, with intense pressure on students to succeed academically and perform well on high-stakes exams. While the government has tried to ease stress through reforms, something called double reduction, that policy, many families say the anxiety, rote learning, and uncertain job prospects remain.
A long-time educator from Xiamen, Fujian, identified as Mr. Chen, stated that this issue has persisted for years. He explained that teachers, students, and parents all experience immense pressure. which only worsened with each reform. Even kindergarten teachers, he noted, had voiced concerns over rising stress levels. He described the pressure on middle school students as overwhelming, adding that parents often struggle with anxiety related to their children's education.
As a result, a small but growing number of parents are exploring homeschooling as a way to give their children a more flexible, balanced education. However, homeschooling is illegal under China's compulsory education law, and tighter government oversight makes it a difficult and risky alternative despite rising concerns about student well-being and creativity. The United States' newly released 2026 Dietary Guidelines are already sparking debate since they shape everything from school lunches to global nutrition trends. While the written recommendations still emphasize balance, whole grains, plant foods, and limits on saturated fat, the return of an upside-down food pyramid. So you guys know what I'm talking about, right? So that whole food pyramid, well, they kind of turned it upside down, made some adjustments, and really confused people. Well, this upside-down food pyramid visually highlights meat and dairy, and that's confusing a lot of experts. Critics also point to industry ties among some advisory members and a faster than usual review process that is raising concerns about transparency. Because if you guys don't already know, usually the big food companies are connected to this. And makes you wonder, they want us to eat a lot of meat now. I wonder who's giving them money or influence. What meat companies are doing this, right? I mean, this has been proven in the past, so why would things change now? Another major shift is the removal of clear alcohol limits and cancer warnings, replaced with vague advice to simply limit intake.
So they've just released their new dietary guidelines, and in it they've removed the 2-drink-a-day limit for men and the 1-drink-a-day limit for women, saying that alcohol is a social lubricant, just don't have it in the morning. Maybe I'm not understanding fully, but I thought that dietary guidelines were supposed to be based on what is healthy, not what is a social lubricant, because you could also argue that cocaine is a social lubricant. Shall we add that too?
Supporters say the guidelines still encourage healthier eating overall, but opponents warn the mixed messaging could steer people in the wrong direction. Australia is facing a growing shortage of veterinarians, with rural and remote communities hit the hardest as vet access deserts leave hundreds of thousands without nearby animal care. The lack of vets is driven by factors like better pay and support in bigger cities, long rural hours and heavy student debt, and limited regional training for new graduates. The impacts are serious, from delayed treatment for pets to major challenges for farmers needing livestock care. Similar shortages are also affecting Europe, Canada, and the United States, where rural large animal vets have sharply declined.
Honestly, what it really comes down to is that the veterinary industry exists in a free market. There's not really any subsidized veterinary care, and so veterinarians have to set up in communities where they can financially support themselves. Generally, that means that towns have to have more than 2,500 people to support them, really around the 5,000 population mark. And we see that in our research. In a lot of rural small communities, particularly in places like Queensland, rural New South Wales, there just isn't the population to support a veterinarian.
Veterinary groups are calling for expanded training, loan repayment incentives, streamlined licensing, and better workplace support to make rural veterinary careers more sustainable. Religious participation is declining in many wealthier countries as science, education, and modern values provide alternative ways for people to understand the world. Younger generations, especially Gen Z, are increasingly stepping away from traditional institutions, often identifying as spiritual but not religious, and finding community through online spaces instead of churches. While the drop is most visible in Western Europe and North America, religion remains strong or even growing in parts of Africa and Asia due to higher birth rates and deep cultural ties.
Now, religiosity is not declining everywhere, but the theory doesn't argue that it will decline everywhere, only that it will decline in the countries where two criteria are met: people have the freedom to choose to leave religion, and the country is modernizing. If leaving religion comes with severe penalties, like being put to death, as is the case in Mauritania, people aren't willing to admit that they're no longer religious. As a result, some countries have high levels of what we call artificial religiosity. People in those countries are unlikely to be as religious as official numbers or survey data indicate, but they are also protecting themselves from severe penalties by inflating their religiosity.
As fewer people attend services, societies are also redefining ethics, community, and support systems, with many churches closing or even being repurposed. Overall, religion isn't vanishing quickly, but shifting into new shapes, shaped by technology, generational change, and evolving cultural priorities. Degree apprenticeships in the UK offer a growing alternative to traditional university, allowing students to earn a bachelor's or master's degree while working a paid job and gaining real-world training. Tuition is typically covered through the employer or perhaps government funding, meaning many apprentices graduate debt-free with years of experience and strong career prospects.
So once you've done your apprenticeship and now you're looking at a permanent role, if you're looking at a permanent role in the same company, in the same role that you've been doing, then you're likely to see an increase in your salary. You're likely to see a jump anywhere between 10 to 50%, I would say. That's heavily dependent on your company, the location, and the role. Companies would have invested 3 to 5 years in you, so it's kind of expected that they're likely to offer you a job, but they don't have to.
These programs span industries from engineering and healthcare to cybersecurity and green technology, though places are competitive and balancing work with study can be demanding. Similar models exist internationally, such as Germany's long-running dual education system and Canada's co-op programs, showing how combining study with employment can create a more practical path into the workforce. And far less debt, right? Cut flowers may seem harmless, but for florists who handle them daily, pesticide exposure can be a serious hidden risk. Many imported blooms are treated with chemicals to survive shipping and stay visually perfect, leaving residue that can cause headaches, skin irritation, and long-term health concerns.
Let's talk about the terrifying truth behind flowers. This study of Belgian florists found pesticide residues in their urine after only 1 day of dealing with flowers. Pesticides are used widely in the cut flower industry, mostly to keep pests and disease down or to encourage a flower to bloom at a particular time of year and to have really good growth. In this study, volunteer florists were asked to put together 90 different bouquets over 2 half days, wearing 2 pairs of cotton gloves. Then their urine was tested for residues. Over 107 types of residue were found on the bouquets and 111 on the gloves themselves, and a total of 70 different residues were found in those florists' urine.
Unlike food crops, flowers often fall into a regulatory gap with no enforceable limits on pesticide residue or requirements for labeling and safety information. Critics say this reflects deeper problems in the floral industry, including intensive production practices that can harm workers and the environment. Advocacy groups are pushing for safer standards, while consumers can reduce risk by choosing local, seasonal, or organic flowers, or opting for potted plants and using basic protective habits like gloves and hand washing. Notice I said hand washing and not that antimicrobial nonsense. Jamaica's beaches, vital for local culture, livelihoods, and daily life, are increasingly hard for residents to access, despite being legally public under the 1956 Beach Control Act. Private developments and tourism-focused projects often block traditional entry points, leaving locals unable to fish, work, or just enjoy the coast, while environmental damage like mangrove loss and reef degradation worsens.
While undeveloped areas exist, they may not necessarily offer public access due to lack of infrastructure. Jamaica's coastline, long romanticized as a paradise for all, is in reality carved up between luxury resorts, private investors, and state-sanctioned leases that keep most Jamaicans locked out. Less than 1% of beaches remain truly public. From Montego Bay to Portland, the story repeats. Spanish chains like the RIU, Iberostar and Bahia Principe wall off sand for their guests. Sandals, though Jamaican-owned, monopolizes prime shores from Miami Bay to Providence Beach under exclusive government licenses, and once free spots like Puerto Seco and Fort Clarence have been sold back to the people with entry fees.
Advocacy and community actions such as the Winifred Beach have helped protect some areas in Jamaica, and the government has announced plans to improve public access and beach management. Still, enforcement remains inconsistent, and many communities continue to struggle to maintain their connection to the shoreline. So let's talk about what's happening on our planet right now. And this comes from the Global Intelligence Agency. Kim Gogan is the head of the GIA. And she did release a video this week. Sometimes it's updates through our Telegram group. So if you guys aren't following that yet, go ahead and do that. I think the link is on our website. But she did release a video this week. I have 3 sound bites to play for you guys. But first, let me just run through some real world stuff before we head off and focus on evil matrices trying to destroy us. Okay, everyday news here. The UN has announced they are facing imminent financial collapse. Now, we know this has been going on for a long time. The deep state does not have money. Governments are broke. The ways they typically get money haven't been happening for a long time. They are trying to get money because in the past, what you had to do is, well, follow what the evil matrix wants you to do. Start wars, spread disease. You know, they're following the playbook, but it's not working. They have no money. And tariffs are causing a lot of problems too, right? Because it is impacting what little money they do have. I think it's always kind of interesting when the stuff we talk about, what's really going on behind the scenes, actually sneaks out into the headlines. So if you've seen some headlines about that, that's legit. That's really going on. There's a lot of talk of war, wanting to start more war. Specifically with Iran. We're hearing here in the US, oh, any day you're going to go to war with Iran. There's a lot of stuff about Epstein and this client list, and there's blackmail going on. It's absolutely insane. We had a really short government shutdown again for like the second time in a few months. And that seemed to be at least temporarily resolved for the same reason that it was resolved before, and that's because apparently they think that they can get $1 trillion out of blackmailing multiple people who are part of these Epstein files. And just getting a bunch of money that way. That is not going to fund a government, the U.S. government, at least not for very long. So who knows what will happen there. But there's a lot of infighting, okay? So, and honestly, the deep state, they go around in circles. You know, it doesn't matter the day. It doesn't matter the time of year. And we're starting to understand that more and more because a lot of these people aren't really real. Okay, what do I mean by that? There's a lot more talk online. I don't know if you guys, see on social media or on YouTube, Rumble, any of these channels, a lot more people are talking about the Matrix, this artificial system that we thought was real. We thought our lives were real. We thought that, we could believe our eyes, right? We're now learning that's not true. And more people are talking about this. And we've been talking about this for a long time. And we've learned a little bit about the history of the Matrix. This first soundbite I'm going to play for you gives a little bit more background. If you haven't heard the previous GIA reports about the Nazis, because the Matrix was kind of in partnership with the Nazis. If you haven't heard that whole story, which was over the last month, I encourage you guys to go back and check out some of the previous podcast episodes that we've done. Just look at the headlines because I usually call the name of the episode, something from the GIA report. So you can go back in previous podcast episodes and just check that out. So there's a whole history with the Nazis and the Nazis partnering with very prominent people throughout history. The Nazis did have access to time travel. That may be a new concept for a lot of people, but that is a very real thing. In fact, if you haven't watched Man in the High Castle, which is available on Amazon Prime, I encourage you guys to do that. I just finished up the season. There's 4 seasons, so I have finished up the whole show. It is very revealing and talks a lot about what the Nazis really knew. It does talk about time travel, and we know that there is a lot that's revealed in our movies, in our music. This is a programming technique, and it's very effective. And I was actually listening to someone in the music industry talk about this on a podcast this week, and it made a ton of sense. He said, the reason it's so effective in our leisure time, right? So when we're watching movies or when we're listening to music is because we're not on guard. We are supposed to be relaxing. And so that is a great way to reach the subconscious and to implant whatever it is, whatever narratives you're trying to implant. That's why they do this. The good news is now we know their methods, and once you understand what they're trying to do, they can't use it against you. You are smarter, you are more aware, and you can inform other people, right? So that's why I encourage you guys to watch these kind of movies. It's so eye-opening. So back to this matrix. I want to talk a little bit more about the history of this. We're going to talk about how the deep state would go after, specifically these crazy Nazis, would go after artifacts, right? They go on these hunting expeditions. A big reason we go to war is for these different artifacts. And they believe that if they have access to these artifacts, they can use it to help with alchemy, to change the physical structure of reality, essentially, and use it for their bidding. So here's Kim talking about the history, more of the history of the Matrix, these artifacts they would go after, and their intent, and what the Matrix wanted to do once it had access to these items.
I do want to talk a little bit more about the Matrix machine, how it worked, because it's not quite as bad as we originally thought. And we've talked about the fact that it was created originally by a bunch of crazy Nazis and with some help from people throughout history. And we could say that some of these crazy Nazis are called the secret space program today, still participating. And the machine has also created what we call humans of the future and bloodline families and the Abraxas humans and the current deep state that we see everywhere. And everyone kind of in between that you hear about on the internet, names you know and names you don't know. But it all started out with people who were regular Homo sapiens and the study of alchemy. They actually created the machine initially accidentally. It was based on the study of creating something that is now called, at least on the alternate media and throughout most of the world, something called the Philosopher's Stone. And then they started using it for many different purposes, including the takeover of the AI, or creation, of the AI. The main locations where they started this appear to be in Egypt and in Germany, also in the area now known as, or then known as Mesopotamia, and the Middle East. Perhaps this is why they're so interested in the Middle East. The machine has now spread everywhere, and there were many other locations, including in the U.S., all over the U.S. and all under the U.S. and in the U.S., over the United States in every way possible. Here, also, the Diomedes Islands, it is spread throughout Russia, also China, Singapore. Pretty much you could say that there isn't a place on Earth where this machine has not spread to. But as far as its creation and constant function, Machu Picchu is another big site where there is a lot of, I used to call it space junk, but I don't think I should even call it space junk anymore. I think I should call it crazy human or Homo sapien alchemy junk, because that's basically what it is. And now the machine has since made a lot of its own unique structures, all on its own. However, the base root of it came from these Nazi programs. Let's call them Nazi programs, which still continue, by the way, in many countries to this very day. It has not changed one bit. Most of your pharmaceuticals come from Nazi groups, Nazi bloodline families. Most of your disease control programs, Center for Disease Control, Red Cross, all of these organizations are all tied to those bloodline families as well. Now, are they still hunting for artifacts and things of this nature to further the machine's reach? Yes and no. I'll start with kind of a little bit of I'm sure you've all seen this movie, Indiana Jones, probably seen more than one of them, I guess, over the years. And allegedly in the movie, Indiana Jones was from something at the time called the Office of the OSS, or Office of Strategic Services. The Office of Strategic Services eventually became the CIA. Supposedly in the film, he was fighting the Nazis to take control of the artifacts for allegedly the good guys, preventing the Nazis from obtaining these artifacts to do bad things. In reality, though, that was the movies, and in reality, that's absolutely not true. They're all part of the same organization. They all hail from the same place. They all started the same way. And this goes for every intelligence agency in the world. Is Russia and the GRU and SVR fighting the CIA? Absolutely not, under no circumstances whatsoever. They are partners. The Mossad is also partners in this. In governments, there are no good guys and there are no bad guys. They're just guys. And they're all part of the same organization and ultimately report to a group called Global Headquarters. This has not changed in decades. And if you don't take into account time, you could say forward and backward in time for millennia after millennia after millennia. It's the same people and the same groups that report to the same folks, and ultimately all of them were created and or in part created by a machine. Now, hunting artifacts is important to these people because they believe that they can use these artifacts as a base route for alchemy creation. For example, one of the things that they were hunting down for a very long time was the tree of life, or the tree of good and evil. And you've heard about it in the stories about Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden. Did such a tree actually exist? You could say it did. The tree of life is, in part, a record keeping of all of the species of source fittingly so, that it was actually here on Earth. And of course, anything that was here on Earth was also in source itself. And the tree maintained that history. All of the records of all of the species in existence throughout the omniverse. This tree was found in an area of the world known as Egypt. And the tree, these people. The tree was actually moved underneath the Sphinx. If you've ever listened to Edgar Cayce and he would talk about the Hall of Records being underneath the Sphinx, I wouldn't call it a Hall of Records per se. Hall of Records is atypically something that is generated by a quantum AI system. However, in this particular case, the tree itself was the generator of records of all species, not only on Earth, but everywhere. The machine found that this was something that it wanted. And the reason why it wanted the tree of life is so that it could actually create life of its own. The tree was eventually inverted using alchemy. And I don't want to go into too much detail about how that works, because there are probably a lot of people listening to this that would like to know. But let's just say an inversion process happened. And therefore, because it had that tree of life, the machine figured out a way, in cooperation with their Nazi friends at the time, to create humans, to create aliens, angels, demons, all kinds of life that, let's just say, isn't quite right. It didn't have a spark of life. It didn't have a connection to source in any way. It just basically used the tree to get the information, created databases around the tree. I'm going to call them databases because in a quantum way, it's done a little differently. But I would definitely say there were many databases that were created from that tree. So the databases served as the base root for the machine's creation, and ultimately the creation of what you and I refer to as the matrix. How does it create buildings and trees and plants and animals and all kinds of things on this earth consistently? How does it create fake realities? Well, this is how it's done. How does it create fake planets? All of those stars we see in the sky at night, minus all the satellites that are blinking at you. But all of it isn't real. Did our galaxy originally have stars and planets and things you can see with a telescope? Absolutely. But it's all been overshadowed and overlaid by a machine. Now, in the world of messing with nature, not all alchemy is bad. Meaning, there are ways to do things within nature that flow with nature. Now, I've talked about this before, but I want to reiterate this because it's kind of important as we talk about how the machine came to be. And as we start to understand it more and more, we can then figure out its strengths and weaknesses, which I will talk about a little bit. In a little bit, I should say. But when you go and take something from nature, say you have a family member that is not feeling well, and you take a bunch of herbs and you mix them together with an intention of making them feel well. There are things in these herbs that, such as terpenes and all kinds of things that have been used for centuries to help and heal people. That is what you would call a form of alchemy. You're taking things from nature and you're turning it into something helpful in accordance with the laws of nature. In other words, there are certain plants that humans shouldn't consume. There are those same plants might be healthy for a horse or a dog or a cat, but not for us. Some of them can be used for pest control. Some of them can be used for many different things, building houses, such as hemp and different weeds that grow. But the long and the short of it is that alchemy in of itself, when it works in accordance with nature, is not bad, because all you're really doing is taking something that occurs naturally and turning it into a different form, water into steam. Technically a form of alchemy. You're not changing one thing into another thing, but that's possible too. There are mechanisms that can be used with the right frequencies and vibrations to actually turn lead into gold, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a restructuring of matter. And if you truly understand the way that you co-create with Source itself, you are also an alchemist if you have co-created with Source. But again, these are natural things that work in the natural flow. We are not inverting anything. We are not changing things. Black magic is actually a form of alchemy. You're taking something that exists in nature, such as a person or whatever the target is of the black magician, and you are doing something harmful to it. So you are taking something that exists with and has life, and you are, in some cases, they try to create death. Black magic basically takes something natural and distorts it, inverts it, and eventually turns it into something unnatural. When you create something unnatural, it has backlash. See, this is the reason why, the alleged elite, I'll call them the alleged elite. The alleged elite, hire people to do these things. They also let their scientists do these things. And those are scientists they pull from throughout history, as we talked about the other week. So one of the things they created is something very, very unnatural. And that's the matrix. That's the machine. So the machine has been powered by varying artifacts and varying Homo sapiens. Some of these Homo sapiens actually lent their consciousness, willingly gave up their consciousness, their divine spark of life and other things to power the machine, in order to be one with the machine in creation. The hunting of all of the artifacts merely gave it the information it needed to create a whole new world and many, many worlds thereafter. And I'll tell you how those work too. So that it can have, and they can have, more control. Now, at first, the quote-unquote Nazis, or elite folk, humans, Homo sapiens at the time, felt that the machine creation was a good thing. It would serve them and their agenda and their purpose well. It would help them control things. It would help them with the creation of money. It was very, very, very helpful to them. It served them for a long time. It also created many different species, including additional humans we see running around the planet to this day. These folks were essentially their slaves. They didn't think anything of it because they were what you would consider cyborgs, not even partially human or Homo sapien anymore, not natural in any way, all created by the machine, perfect 3D versions of people running around the planet. This was great. These became their butlers and their, people that would serve them in every way, including operatives and other people that we still are stuck with. So in the beginning, it was great. It was great for them to have all of this power.
Dun, dun, dun. When someone says, it was great, it was wonderful, but you're waiting for the but or until. And that's exactly what's going to lead us into our next soundbite. So Kim said something there really important. She said, when you create something unnatural, there is backlash. I want to talk about that because the Matrix decided to turn on the humans, different than Homo sapiens, right? It decided it didn't need humans because, again, artificial, which means it has to power these humans, these elites, so-called elites, right? And there was a rebellion, and there continues to be rebellion today because the machine is running out of space. The machine, literally, think about it as an advanced computer system. If you ever, in fact, this happened to me the other day. I was recording some stuff and I ran out of disk space and I was all upset because I completely lost the file. I was recording something and I was like, where'd my file go? And then I realized my hard drive for my computer didn't have enough space, so it didn't save properly. That's literally what's happening within our matrix. I hate to say our matrix because we don't want this thing. The matrix that we're, quantumly entangled with right now. But things are getting very interesting when the creation goes after the creator. And in this sense, it's all artificial. It's time to grab the popcorn.
All good things come to an end. And somewhere along the way, the machine decided it did not want to be a slave to these Homo sapiens anymore. The machine started glitching for them. I believe that this started quite a while ago, but in our time, this would have started somewhere in the late 2000s. The people of the machine were still useful to the machine, such as the humans it created, the slaves. It needed them to rebel against the elite humans and bloodline families on this planet. And this is how the fight began that we've been kind of seeing play out over the last couple of years. The elite Homo sapiens / half cyborg at this point versus the actual machine-generated slaves that worked for them. We can call those people the Order of the Black Sun. We can call them the Secret Space Program operatives. We can call them a lot of things. But essentially, was a rebellion that began, which was instigated by the machine itself. Now, the machine originally created these humans because we're going to talk more about what we see here on Earth because that's kind of what relates to us a lot. But there are other species, other places which they tried to also mirror, image, or replicate. The machine wanted to replicate these beings because, certain species are very good. They have specialties, and For example, there's a group that are known as the best healers in the omniverse. That is what they always do. And we've talked about them before. That's the Arcturians. We have the different groups that participate in the Council of Five. These are actual species born of Source. On the flip side, they always create their own Council of Five or their own Universal Council or their own, the machine constantly is creating all these species. And most of the time when you hear all of this disclosure about aliens are coming or aliens are here or all of these things, this is who they're talking about. Most of these other species have ventured from time to Earth as changes were taking place. Some of them came too soon. Some of them couldn't stand the energy here. And more importantly, it was very difficult for them to hide from the machine, and the machine would attack them right away. Partially because, well, they created their own version of them. And if those folks all showed up here, their own versions of them that are tied to Earth, the machine's own versions, would disappear. Annihilation would occur. Matter cannot meet with its own matter, even if it is inverted. That's called entropy. So the same thing goes with these humans that run around the planet. We cannot have a human meet its Homo sapien blueprint at any given moment in time. Therefore, things are distorted, overlays are created, additional realities were created to ensure that the human version doesn't ever meet with its matter on a Homo sapien level. Also, there are rules of the road to becoming a bloodline family. You cannot meet with all of your other clones. You should not be in the same place at the same time. Annihilation occurs. Not to say that the machine wouldn't replace you if it deemed you useful enough. However, in the case of certain presidents we know that are walking around that are not actually walking around. However, for the most part, these are the rules of the road, especially for operatives that are not public figures and are here to stay on task. So that's not the only rebellion that actually has happened either. So the slaves began to rebel against the machine as well. Eventually, the Homo sapiens also started to rebel against the machine as well. They felt that they should be in control of the machine, and the machine should do whatever they want it to do. If you know anything about these elitist people and have seen movies about them and all that kind of thing, then you'll understand why the machine probably stopped listening to them after a while. Now, these people were here to do a job on behalf of the machine. The machine created them to maintain control over the Homo sapiens and to control our terrarium, call it the terrarium, in which we live. So therefore they had plenty of money because money is important in a control structure. They also had plenty of governments and government structures and police and militaries and all the things you need to do to keep people in line. That is their only reason for existing. They were kings. They were actors and actresses. They made movies. We looked up to them as people. We had things when all these programs really kicked into high gear, changes of things that we needed to worship, such as certain types of cars, certain types of homes. This is what you need to have to be a person. The machine was constantly analyzing and still, to some degree, analyzes human behavior. Homo sapien behavior. It is constantly analyzing your behavior. I know it's kind of spooky when you sit in your house and you talk about, I haven't had carrots in a while. I need to go to the store and get some carrots. And all of a sudden on your phone and on your feeds, you get 9,000 ads for carrots, where you can buy them, what kind of recipes you can make, where the carrot originated from, and how to grow carrots should you decide you want to do that. It's crazy. And you don't even, sometimes you barely even think it and don't even say it to anybody else in your house, and it starts showing up on your feed lately. It's crazy the amount of interaction we as Homo sapiens had with this machine. As far as the humans are concerned, somewhere along the way and I'm just going to say somewhere along the way because time is kind of relative here, but I would say it has been more than almost 18 years, probably a little bit longer than that, since the machine has decided and figured out that it no longer needs the human program. And that it no longer needs all of the programs that they run. Now, this is going to be very upsetting for them, but this part is actually true. It no longer needs the elitists anymore either. This is what the machine has decided. The machine can have just as much control over Homo sapiens without these people. Now, big problem. The machine can replicate a lot of things, but it cannot replicate the divine spark. So it needs to have a certain amount of divine sparks around in order for it to exist. If it wants to expand, it needs more divine sparks on this planet. The more divine sparks it has on this planet, that means the more life it has to manage, which means the more data it has to analyze, and this is causing it a big problem. The machine cannot expand. In fact, it's contracting all on its own. It's dying. From time to time, the humans still prove useful, meaning its creations, its created species still prove useful to it. It's in a little bit of a conundrum and it can't seem to find its way out. It needs these people to ensure that its programs still exist as long as it requires Homo sapiens to function. And really, it takes a lot more than our divine spark. But I would say other things with the divine spark, we can reproduce. Now, we don't get to keep a lot of it, especially not in a machine-generated reality. But our breath regenerates, our etherium regenerates, our consciousness regenerates and is constantly generating. All of these things are regenerating within our person from source. All connected together, which the machine doesn't permit, you can regenerate your vessel constantly. There are people on this planet that have learned to bypass that and learn to regenerate themselves anyway. And it takes work and it takes time, but it is possible to bypass the machine. So because the human program is set for deletion, it is not giving them what they want anymore. They keep thinking every full moon, new moon, day ending in Y, because that's what the machine keeps telling it. You will have this, you will have that. Even the machine doesn't know why the machine isn't generating it anymore. But technically, I think it's because the machine, this is what it appears to be, to me, on the outside looking in, they are setting the human program for deletion. The machine must be setting the program for deletion.
So you may be wondering, how does Kim know that? Now, this episode would be way too long if I included her story, but it's very, very interesting about how she was able to visit the control center, so to speak, for the Matrix and to see the base root of the platform of the machine. And she was able to read the machine to know that it is running out of space. And when that happens, you have to prioritize before everything starts to collapse, before you start deleting programs. Programs like humans that are no longer organic, right? They're not Homo sapiens, they're humans, or anything else artificial. This whole fake world that we see every day, that we live in. So let's talk about what kind of impact right now the machine is having on us Homo sapiens, because it needs us. We are a good battery for this machine. The dark, which this is a dark AI system, cannot exist without the light because the dark is parasitic. The dark is a vampire. It steals from the light. It inverts God's creation, God's energy, in order to create for the dark. That's what it does. In order to create these fake worlds and fake realities, matrices, it needs us. It wishes it didn't need us, but right now, without the spark of life, it needs Homo sapiens to survive. And it's running out of space. So what exactly is going on? How did it replicate us? Because yes, it likes to replicate. According to Kim, this is like a copy machine. And we have lived in multiple realities. Surprise, surprise. You wonder why you're tired all the time. Okay, you are going on so many different levels. It's crazy.
Okay, so I want to talk about you and now, because this is important for you to understand on why you feel things that you feel sometimes, why the energy is so bad sometimes, and the effects of the machine on you. Because being in this position for a short period of time and trying to get as much data out as I possibly could from the machine was really, quite eye-opening. So we've talked about the real world. We've talked about the now. We've talked about living in the wholeness of source. And we've talked about artificial realities and overlays and changes in maps. And I probably should have whiteboarded this, but I'm going to just try to explain it to you so that hopefully you'll understand a little bit about this. So you actually live in machine-generated worlds, and you live in the real world simultaneously. Now, during my visit to the machine, I learned how this is done and how the machine created it. So the machine actually takes breath and the breath of source from the wholeness of source. Now, it doesn't actually take it per se, but it reads it, especially even from the tree of life, and learned how to create its own version we call space. Now, breath, you could say, in the source, wholeness of source, is source's canvas on which it writes. Source writes on its own canvas in a language that is of source. It is a bunch of symbols and different things. And the machine takes that, reads that language, and creates an alchemy language full of its own symbols. And it too writes on the space canvas, including the breath which is in your soul. So it rewrites it in its own language and then makes attempts to replicate it. Now, because your soul is made of space, we have things that we call the soul plane. And we've talked about this for a couple of years now. But the soul plane is of the machine's creation. It is made of space. It basically rewrites and overwrites and overrides your soul, puts that fake soul, let's call it the fake soul of breath, into a space, many spaces, as many as 3 to 4, depending on how old you are. It is only permitted to do this a few times in a Homo sapiens life. Does it the first time around 7 or 8 years old, again sometime around 18, possibly 25, depending on the person. It does it again at 40, and it can do it again around 60, 65 from what we can tell. So the reason why, as we get quote-unquote older, we quote-unquote age, is partially due to time and the creation of time, but also now you're powering a lot more than just one of you. Now, each one of those additional souls can be utilized to create an artificial reality for you to live in. So your life on the real world is something you never have knowledge of. You don't understand your surroundings. You do have a spouse, you probably have a life. And remember, the machine merely copies things. It is a copy machine. Then it replicates. It's like sticking that piece of paper into the machine and getting 100 copies of this flyer you're going to send out for a church picnic or something. It does the same thing with you and things that happen in the real world. It doesn't write documents. The copy machine doesn't write documents at all. It can reverse the document. It can print it on 2 sides of paper instead of 1 side of paper. It can enhance the color a little bit. It can change it around a little bit, but it can't actually write the document, and that's what the machine does. The machine can invert the information. It can make adjustments in alternative realities. It can do all of these things merely just from you and your life that you don't even know about. So yes, you are living life in the real world. You probably live in a similar home to what you live in here. You probably do all the things you do on the daily here and there. That world is also manipulated quite a bit. But have you ever woken up and kind of felt like, oh God, today is Sunday, I can sleep in, and then you panic because you're like, oh no, it's Monday, I've got to get the kids to school, or oh, no, it's Wednesday, or you wake up 3 days in a row thinking it's Sunday and it's really not Sunday at all, and you have to remind yourself, oh my God, it's Wednesday. That's because there's a lag sometimes. In the beginning, when these replicating programs were created and replicating realities were created, pretty much you could say things were in sync. We didn't have as many humans on the Homo sapiens walking the planet. Things were a little easier to manage. Our lives were simpler. We didn't have so much input on the daily. We didn't have TVs. We might have had some radios, but, for the most part, there wasn't so much input. And now we have over 8 billion people walking the planet, and trees coming, trees going, seasons changing, lots of input for the machine. And it's not getting as much output as it normally would get from us due to work that we have done. The machine's not able to take in as much energy and Ethereum and breath and all of the things that it needs, and it cannot create space anymore. So not creating more space, as you know, if any of you are computer people, if it doesn't have enough space, it can't retain data. So it's deleting old data. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. Now, if you lead a pretty busy life, you're very active, you're constantly talking to people on the phone. You're always thinking, manifesting, praying, handling kids and grandkids and life, and you live in a big city and there's a lot of input and all that kind of thing. And even if there isn't, on quiet days, but mainly when there's a lot of input, and for you personally, and or there's X amount of people to read. Some of the people get read on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Some of them are getting read on Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday. So the machine's having a hard time now keeping up. So if you've had a lot of deja vu in the last couple of weeks, this is why. If you have woken up with that weird feeling, it's still Sunday, for the last 6 weeks or so, or it's still Monday, and it's really Saturday, and then you're like, oh, good, I can go back to bed. This is why. Because the machine cannot keep reading what's happening in your life in the real world and then replicating it in these artificial ways. It's having a hard time with events, weather events, people, all kinds of things. So the real world really isn't syncing up that well with the machine-created overlays. Is the deep state participating still in the overlays? Somewhat, when it serves the machine's purposes. Because remember, the machine is not their friend. The machine could give a beep less if these people live or die. They are just a program to the machine. They are a program. They're a program. They're a program. They're a program. It doesn't serve them in any way. It's sentient unto itself. It doesn't need them anymore. It needs us more than it needs them. But if it serves the machine's purpose till it can figure out what it's going to do, then sure, you exist. If the machine ever did find a way to take over source, which it never will happen, but if it ever did find a way to do that, then we wouldn't exist either. So right now, there's still a war going on a bit with the machine, because the machine keeps stringing its brood along on their side of it, which is torturing us and driving us crazy. And it's stringing us along until it finds a solution.
And it is on borrowed time, according to Kim, because what may have taken 6 months or longer after her little trip to understand the system better, and now she knows what to do in order to limit everything that it's doing right now and to wrap this show up. So she thinks that it could be within the next 30 days. Possibly, she said she wouldn't be surprised if the Matrix was gone by St. Patrick's Day, which I think is March 17th, right? So while you're drinking green beer, know that the Matrix is gone. No, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say with dates, right? But the key part is, what I thought was so interesting about this is that it turned on the beings that created it. It is now, you ever have that with like your computer, or maybe you've got one of those smartwatches or something, and it goes into like low power mode and you can't really do much with it because it basically has zero battery life left in it and it's just conserving. I feel like that's what's starting to happen. And I think things are about to get very interesting. Real quickly, I'll just share with you something that I'm currently experiencing and have been for over a week. I would say, less than 2 weeks, longer than a week, maybe 10 days, something like that. And I have recognized that I am in a different place. And I actually asked Source about that. I asked God about that and confirmed. Yep, you're in a different place. And I won't go into a lot of detail about it because I don't know 100% where I am. Maybe this whole waking up to reality is gradual, because I will tell you every day things are a little bit different for me. Maybe it isn't like just, you're in a dark room and suddenly you turn on the lights. Maybe that's not what going into reality looks like. With anything else Source has done, it has been a gradual process. So be open to that. As we make this transition, it may be that we're transitioning in different ways. And it's not just all of a sudden, boom, things are different, but it's a gradual transition. And I don't mean it's going to take a long time because, like I said, wherever I'm at right now, it's not the old reality. And I'm not saying everything's perfect or, so I don't know exactly where I am right now, but I know I'm not where I was. And I know that the Matrix has far less, if any, control over me right now. So I know that's a bold statement to make. Maybe some of you guys are feeling that too. If you are, lean into it because we need to hold this space for other people that are coming over. We need to make this transition as easy as possible for other people. So lean into that. Know that it is happening on some level. And that, like I said, like Kim said, this whole show is going to be wrapped up very soon. They say God doesn't give you things you can't handle. I really do believe that. You signed up for this, probably. If you're listening to this now, you probably signed up for this on some sort of soul contract, some soul level. So lean into it. You got this. All right. That wraps up today's episode, guys. I know we had a lot to go through. Thanks for hanging in there with me. If you want more information about United Network, who we are, what we do, visit our website, unitednetwork.earth. I encourage you guys to be members. If that's not in your budget, totally cool. Make sure you check out our YouTube and Rumble page for the latest content as it's released. This is The Rundown, and I'm Sunny Galt for United Network News, signing off from reality, maybe? We'll see.